So I had another question. So when we
Okay.
were watching it, you mentioned, because there's this moment when they're in this plane, this like crash plane or whatever,
Hmm.
and they're like drunk and high, and they're kind of having a moment. And you're saying that was the midpoint, and I was curious to know more about that and why you felt that was the midpoint, because I was having a
Well,
hard time seeing
well,
a distinct shift. Because at first I thought, oh, this is going to be the moment when they change tactics. I don't want to spoil the movie for people who haven't seen it, but we are going to, so fair warning. But it was like that was the moment when she was going to decide to go after the stone instead of
right.
going after the sister. But it wasn't. That decision actually came later.
It did come
So
later.
so it didn't seem like anything shifted, but maybe I just missed it. So I was
No,
curious
no,
to
no.
know
So
what you
no, no.
thought.
Actually, the midpoint, I had that on my notes to bring up as well, because what is
Hmm.
happening at the midpoint of the story, and actually
Yeah.
the midpoint, like as far as, and I was talking about the midpoint of the story because I was watching the actual time. I was like,
Yeah. So
this
we knew
is
it was
now,
around
we are
like,
now halfway through this movie and what's happening, and I think this movie is not exactly an example of the typical midpoint structure. The closest event that happened at the midpoint of that story was actually after they got out of the plane. The next thing that happens to them is when they are in that town and looking for the car, and then that guy recognizes her and becomes her friend instead. The drug dealer becomes her friend.
you
So
know
that
what?
was the scene after
Hmm.
basically right after the scene in the plane.
I have a thought actually now that I'm
Okay.
thinking about it, because something changed. There's something else that I noted that changed in that scene, which was actually pretty important. Was that she, up until that point, it was a resistance. There was no sign of attraction on her end to him until that moment when she was drunk and high and she started to relax. And it was like all these walls that she had, you're not the perfect man. When I want to come back to that, by the way, at the end, the idea of what a real man is. She's saying, she's giving him all this like critiques. And then she kind of loses her inhibition because she's, inebriated, and all of a sudden you see that she's being drawn to him, and so it could be seen as the midpoint on her end on a romantic side, because that was a moment when her sort of the way she saw him treat, or the way she behaved towards him was different. Like she wasn't, clearly she was attracted to him the whole time, but she was hiding it from herself. So that could be what the shift was, because usually there's a lot of different things that can be a midpoint. I've been almost every time I watch a movie, I've been doing this for like, I don't know, 4 or 5 months now. Every time I watch a movie, I try to note what the midpoint is. It's actually there are a lot of differences in what it can be, but there's usually in a movie a major shift